This is a Global Skills Podcast, conversations that shape the future of work and learning. We're exploring how we close the skills gap and build a future where everyone has the chance to thrive. From education to business, connecting people, ideas, and opportunities that drive change. It's about collaboration, curiosity, and creating real impact today. Because every skill learned brings us one step closer to a more inclusive world. The Global Skills Podcast, where learning and opportunity come together. Jayke, thank you for joining Global Skills Podcast. It is great to have you because you are at the forefront. You are in a unique position that you have multiple clients and you're all about supporting talent acquisition teams to be as productive as they can be. Tell me what it is that you do and how did you get here? How did you fall into it?
Yeah, I feel like my career just falls into different places. It started in recruitment was a complete accident. I was doing a business administration apprenticeship. I went for an interview for for a sales administrator role that paid like 2k more. It was 18k rather than 16k or something. I went for an interview via Hayes, via a lady called Julie Futcher at Hayes, who was the office manager of Northampton at the time. And in that conversation, she said, "Have you ever considered recruitment as a career?" And I went from there. I ended up joining Hayes, and suddenly a few moves down the line, and we're setting up a training business, doing agency recruitment work, mostly rec direct, but also some other bits and pieces as well. Setting up networking events, doing some podcasts as guests, starting a podcast with a colleague, doing lots of video stuff. So there's loads going on at the minute, and I always feel like I struggle to remember everything because I have to refer to my notes and my diaries and things to keep stuff in line.
Well, I know we have talked about the shift in recruitment, talent acquisition that's happened in the last year or two. But when we connected today, you shared a stat about a role that you posted just yesterday. I think it'd be really interesting if you could maybe share a bit about that.
Yeah, so I'm doing some work that's outside of normal wheelhouse for a communications agency. I posted 3 job adverts at 2 p.m. yesterday. It's currently 11:40 a.m. the next day, and we're currently sitting at about 370 applications across the 3 jobs, which is crazy. I'm trying to work through them one job at a time. We've got 7 CVs ready to send for one of these jobs already. 3 have gone, 4 are going. It's hard, it's sad because there's so many people that are really, really highly qualified, really smart, intelligent people that I'm having to reject because they don't quite fit the mark compared to some of the others. But it's so ridiculously competitive out there at the moment.
And the caliber of people applying, have you seen a shift in terms of the people that you're not progressing are still high quality? Or
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, for the rec-to-rec work stuff, it's less so because A, we receive fewer applications, and B, they come from all sorts of places and a lot of them are completely irrelevant. But what I'm finding is even with 350 applications and more for these communications roles, a significant portion of them, they might not have everything, they are in the wheelhouse. They've got the right sort of qualifications or the right sort of background. And, there's sort of people that 10, 15 years ago, maybe they would have been considered because, we'd be a bit more flexible. But right now, it's just insanely competitive.
so what do you feel is happening from the perspective of organizations are like in reports that are coming through from McKinsey and Deloitte that they have skills gaps, but then you're saying there's an abundance of skills out there. Where's the mismatch?
Yeah, the maths doesn't add up, does it? It's not mathing properly. There's a lot of people out of work, and the stats don't seem to reflect what I see. I don't know if maybe it's just certain of the industries that I spend a lot of time in that feel like they're struggling more as well. I think industries like, anything communications and writing based is being affected by people thinking they can do it themselves with ChatGPT. You see that across copywriting, you see that across comms and marketing, you see it across recruitment to some degree and TA, and there's a lot of belief that everything can be automated. And while a lot of it can, it's choosing the right things. Yeah, I just feel like that there's certain industries that are just really struggling at the moment. It's not just AI, the whole global economy is all over the place. We've not really recovered from COVID. We've had crisis after crisis after crisis since then globally that seems to affect us. And there's just certain industries that are less resilient to those changes that get hit harder, and recruitment is very much one of those because people recruit less when they're struggling.
So your focus as well is actually going in not just to help. I know it's quite unusual actually what you're doing, which is the recruitment piece. You work more with in-house talent acquisition teams to help them become more efficient at the process of hiring, sourcing, screening, job ads, and so on.
Yeah.
What has been the shift that you've seen for in-house talent acquisition in the last year or two? And where are you finding that they're finding the biggest challenge?
The biggest challenge seems to be volume and capacity, and that feels like it's been a pretty consistent theme over the last few years. Really, those teams are not getting bigger. In a lot of cases, they're getting smaller. The volume of applications coming in for the broad for most roles is a lot higher, and I think teams are struggling to deal with that volume. They're struggling to deal with how they can maintain a good candidate experience when they just can't physically look at all of the CVs and talk to all of the candidates and have good communication with them, because the volumes are so big. And as I say, the teams are, in a lot of cases, seem to be getting a lot smaller.
And why do you think that it's an abundance of applications for a role?
Sure. I mean, it's a combination of factors, and then they sort of seem to stack up on each other and go into this cyclical thing where they sort of build each other up. So part of it is the fact that a lot of people are out of work. There's a lot of fewer jobs compared to how many people actually need those jobs, and there's a lot of really good qualified people out there struggling because they just can't find the roles. I think economically the amount of roles are down because businesses don't have confidence in the future. They're much more risk averse and much less likely to hire, and that risk aversion also then translates into people that are in work are less likely to move, and so you get fewer vacancies open up that way. You get fewer growth vacancies, so you get this double attack of the amount of vacancies going down. Combine that with the amount of extra candidates there are. We've had easy apply or quick apply, across various job boards and across LinkedIn for a long time now, and I disliked it when it happened. And I dislike it even more now because I think it encourages just low effort applications. I see a lot of irrelevant applications across a lot of jobs. People that there's just no chance, but why wouldn't they apply? It takes them 4 seconds to press the button when they've already got their CV lined up in the back end of the job board. Why wouldn't they try? In their eyes, it's a numbers game. Combine that now with AI tools that are coming out to mass apply, where you can spend money and have a tool go out and apply to 1,000 jobs. An application now is such a disposable thing, whereas it used to be you could go into a place physically with a CV and pick up a job, and now that just doesn't happen. What happens is, because you get a higher volume of applications, recruiters that tend to be in smaller teams are doing a poorer job generally of responding to people because they just haven't got the capacity to do it properly, or they haven't got the automation set up yet to do it that way. And then of course that makes candidates in turn more desperate, more willing to go and press easy apply and play just a numbers game.
That's really interesting. Like, are you hearing from recruiters and talent acquisition professionals that the more you talk, how long can you sustain that before you sort of feel like you're burning out?
Yeah, exactly. A lot of TA people on the market right now. It's really difficult to find jobs in TA. I've got a lot of ex-colleagues and contacts that some that are in work now, some that have struggled and had periods of a year or more without work. And most of us aren't set up for a year without work. Most of us can't do that. I can't do that. We can't just survive a year without earning anything. So it becomes then a really stressful thing, because it's not just about a new career or a new job. It's about survival. It's about maintaining the roof over your head. It's about feeding your children and surviving Christmas and things like that. And it becomes a really big emotional, stressful thing.
One area that we have heard quite a bit in different interviews is around organizations seeing that if they can create a common skills language within the business, it enables talent acquisition and talent management to work closer together. And the reason I bring this up now is because in many cases when redundancies are happening, smart, intelligent decisions around who should be let go are not being made. They're being made just on let's lose 10% of headcount, or, informally it might even be one leader not particularly liking someone and they get the boot.
Or who happens to be more visible in the organization and therefore, oh, they must be good because they're visible.
100%. And I just wonder, and it has come up how costly TA is and recruitment is, that if an organization had a better grasp of the skills of their talent and what gaps they had and invested in the people that they already had to acquire the skills needed today and I guess help them future-proof their careers, then we wouldn't have what could be coming like this epidemic. I think it's very quiet, the redundancies that are happening. You're getting the odd headline, but the reality is a lot of people are losing work. What responsibilities do you think employers have around really understanding the skills beyond the CV of their workforce and actually investing in them?
I think I've been a big advocate of skills-based hiring over the last few years. It's sort of, looking into it more and learning about it. I wrote a training course on it, and I think it's really important because I think we're in a world where people are being judged on things like the jumpiness of their CV or the exact experiences they've got or the exact job titles they've got, when these things aren't necessarily a good reflection on what that person is. A lot of people have been going through a lot of redundancies, a lot of difficulties. People have taken on jobs that aren't really in their wheelhouse or aren't really what they're after because they've had to survive. I'm not at the point yet where I think, CVs should be gone away with and that should be the end of that. I do think in certain roles and certain role types, the CV becomes less relevant and is actually should be maybe our secondary tool for assessment as opposed to our primary method of sort of looking at somebody. And I absolutely agree that our talent and talent acquisition function should be more aligned. I see a lot of businesses now advertising or recruiting heads of talent that are a combined function of training and development and recruitment. And I think that's really interesting and really useful. And there is a shift happening. I saw a talk at Breakfast, I want to say last year, by Robert Newry, the CEO of Arctic Shores, alongside some of the guys at Siemens. I think it was the recruitment manager there and one of the hiring managers, and they had just implemented skills-based hiring into a particular function or a particular part of the business. And the talk I saw was like the year on, so this is a year later and how it's gone, and it was really successful. And it's interesting seeing it in that sort of environment, because I guess when people first talked about skills-based hiring, it was always, well, it won't work for experienced roles because we need to know they've done the right sort of jobs and things like that. We need to know their background. It might work for junior jobs and things like that. But actually, Siemens have shown that you can do this in highly technical niche areas by having a broad enough and detailed enough skills taxonomy to really understand what the skills are that you need and which skills are trainable, which ones are sort of inbuilt and they need to have.
And can you expand a bit on the skills taxonomy? Because obviously that's interesting, and that's work that we do as well. We help companies create that live skills taxonomy, and we know many companies are now realizing the importance of having it. And I think the reasoning behind the importance of having it is, I do remember I would call hiring managers and be asking about, okay, what experience do you need? And then you'd get to, we need 5 years experience, but we'll only pay this salary. And you say, well, that's mission impossible. So what are the key skills? And they'd kind of struggle to give you more than 4 or 5 hard skills. And you go tap into soft skills and they'd say, good communicator, team player. And then that's it. The world that we're in now is obviously very different. And if we think of all of the new skills that are required around AI, how important do you feel that skills taxonomy will be for TA and even TM within a business moving forward?
Yeah, I think the TM piece is really interesting because I think you've got this gap in a lot of businesses where TA brings these people in and TM or talent management, talent development, whatever that function is, are training them. But there's no link, there's no conjoining sort of, there's no communication there necessarily. It's just, well, we've hired these people, now talent management are going to go and assess them themselves and train them. If things are done well and really well, you can sort of say you can hire people on the basis of a certain skill set, and you can know that on hiring them that they're lacking maybe this skill set. But also, if you've got the right communication with the talent management team, you know that it's okay to hire people lacking that skill set because we've got really good training programs around that, and automatically that person comes in, they've got a profile on them based on the assessment done at interview stages, based on what skills that we believe they have and at what level, and the talent management, talent development team can really easily then book them onto certain training courses or arrange things with them or work with them on where they need to develop. And suddenly you get this much more seamless journey for somebody coming into an organization where they're on that journey straight away to growing and developing, and you can start to build those learning paths in a little bit more cleanly.
You mentioned before about the CV maybe becoming the secondary tool to the whole process. That's interesting. Could you expand on that?
Sure. I think we're a long way off of like CVs going completely. A lot of cases, although I could be wrong there because I've seen businesses do it. There's certain roles in certain areas where they need particular qualifications or something that fall outside of the skills taxonomy, or maybe it doesn't. Maybe there's a way of factoring that in. I don't know. But really, like the CV, it's just not that relevant. It just doesn't feel that relevant for most people. Unless, yes, you might want to know, which businesses they've worked for, and that affects your opinion of somebody, but then is that just a kind of discrimination in a way on what opportunities they've been given in the past? I think actually, sorry, I'm going aside a little bit here. One of the biggest things that hiring through skills rather than experience and background and university name can do is it's so good for diversity. It's so good for inclusivity. It's so good for removing a lot of that bias around, well, he went to X university and this person went to, Y university, and Y university is better. And it doesn't account for the fact that people have different opportunities growing up and different financial support, different contacts. You talk about, whenever you hear about certain businesses, certain big, financial institutions and the like, where people only get those jobs through knowing somebody, which feels like a really unhealthy way of working. It's like the old boys club, which is not healthy. Maybe there's people in the country that don't necessarily want that changed, but I feel like, we should all be given the opportunity to use our skills wherever we can, wherever it fits. And that's not often the case. The skills-based hiring for me is a really big one for that inclusivity. It really gets over that bias. Do you know what? I once wrote a job ad for one of the big utilities companies I work for, and one particular manager. The job ads are quite quirky, quite full of character. And one of the things I've always done is reduce the amount of requirements, because from an inclusivity point of view, it's better if we don't have a bullet point list of 15 requirements. And I remember one manager giving me a piece of feedback saying that he didn't like the advert that I'd given it. And the reason he didn't like it was because he'd taken it to his friends, the boys at the boating club he used to frequent. And for me, that was such a clear indication that you need this. They need this ability to be a bit more inclusive to what they're hiring, because all he wanted to do was talk to what's the phrase he used, like old, white and pale, right? They're just a bunch of
Copies.
Yeah, just a bunch of carbon copies that doesn't allow for anybody else to come and join and be a part of, the very exclusive club. I think skills-based hiring is part of that. And I think, hiring the right way rather than just because they've gone to the right university or they've worked for the right company prior.
Completely. Well, that really means having a bit of anonymization, because bias can be there, but also unconscious bias. When you're working with the TA teams, what do you feel today are the most important metrics that they're focused on improving?
I've seen some really interesting talks on this. There's a company called Evident that I think I was co-running the event, and they did a talk at, and one of their founders, guy called Philip Spain, was talking about the different metrics that we should be looking at in TA, and it was really, really, really interesting actually, because he was talking about, I think we were talking about this before we started recording, about how TA is often seen as a cost rather than as as a cost center rather than as a profit center, and yes, technically it is, but there's lots of ways that you can evidence that TA has a positive financial impact on a business, but it's a lot harder to do. And the old school metrics of things like time to hire and measuring amount of vacancies don't quite cut that. But these guys at Evidence have some really good ideas on what other sort of metrics you can look at. And you know what? I can't remember the details of the talk. It's annoying because there's some great stuff in there. But it was all about understanding the cost of an empty seat and how expensive is it to have an empty vacancy in a particular role. If that's costing us X amount a day to have nobody working in that role, then by reducing that time to hire by 10 days, we're actually saving X amount of money. And you can really start to look at it financially, how much money is being saved or made from certain hiring initiatives. And it's those sorts of things. There's a lot more stuff they have that I can't quite recall that was really, really good. The evidence to worth going and have a look at.
I think that helps TA get a budget from C-suite, because without demonstrating the true cost of open headcount or replacing attrition, all of that, as you say, if the KPIs are just linked to performance metrics that don't really bring value to the business, then they don't get the budget. And I think for many TA teams, what I'm hearing through the interviews is that they want budget to really ramp up. If they can't get more headcount within their TA team, well, they need budget to automate and improve and work closer with learning and talent management. But if a company is going to be really competitive and future-proof the talent, it's a necessity. Where, with all the activities that you're doing with TA, recruitment, from podcast to academy to recruitment, where would you like to be in the next 6 to 12 months from now? And what sort of impact would you like to have had with, the different organizations you support?
And one I should have a more ready answer to, right? It feels like this is the sort of thing I should have thought about. So I'd like to be not financially worried all the time, to be honest. I think, we've all been in a bit of survival mode these last few years, and I feel like I'm always sort of playing catch up a little bit. I think the two things, I'm really enjoying so I'm doing work with Will's Talent now, where, it's on a freelance basis, where essentially Will Brashroff's great brand, very well known in the industry, and essentially he sees me jobs and I fill them. And I like that way of working, because I like filling jobs. I like crafting great adverts and finding great candidates and filling jobs that way. So I'd like to keep developing that and keep doing some of that work with some of my time. That pays the bills and keeps me alive. What I'd really like to do is develop the training side of the business as well and grow there. So I must admit, when I started the training business, I sort of focused a little bit too much on everything. It was kind of like, look, I can come to a TA team, I can come to an agency team, and I'll train you anything you want to learn. And I have this whole list of modules. But the reality is it's too much. You can't go to a business and say, what are your problems? I will solve any of them, because they want to see a little bit of specialism, a little bit of niche, a little bit of something a bit more. So now the focus is much more on the job advertising side of the training. I think it's one of those things that is often underutilized in both TA teams and especially for recruitment agencies. I think TA teams recognize the benefit of having good advertising a little bit more maybe than agencies do. But I think both sides, there's certainly some work to be done to recognize that it's worth investing time in, because I've seen the difference of what can be done. I've worked in technical roles where they've not hired anybody, and suddenly with a good ad, they're attracting people just because it's well written and people want to read it and people actually want to digest it, want to engage them with the person that's written those things. For me, that's the area where I really want to develop, is mostly face-to-face training. I know a lot of trainers in this market like to do lots of digital stuff, and actually when you look at the training community, everyone always talks about scaling through video and posting, having video content that people can pay for, and that's kind of the scaling method for that kind of stuff. But for me, I'm kind of old school in that I want to do more face-to-face training rather than digital training. I don't want to just sell videos of myself and say, here you go, give me some money and I'll send you a video and this program and you can do things that way. Like, I want to be in front of people. I want to see them. I want to talk to them. I want to be able to adapt the training on the fly to their needs, and I want to run workshops with them and really help them practice and develop that way. So for me, it's all about that face-to-face training, getting in front of people, practicing my craft as well by just being there and working with people that want to learn.
That passion comes through, that you really want to help them, and even the fact that you're still hands-on in recruiting. There's no better way to coach when you're still active.
100%. I've seen trainers and taught trainers before, and I don't want to be that trainer in 10 years' time that's like, this is what I did back in the day. Do you know what I mean? I want to stay relevant and stay up to date and understand, what the market shifts are. It's why I'm at every event I can be at. I was at IHR, obviously, where we met last week, at Breakfast a few months ago. I've got the Recruitment Agency Expo next week. So there's lots of these events, and I try and go to as much as I can and just immerse myself in all the different industries. And on the other side as well, I'm massively interested in the craft of writing. When I talk about job advertising, it's not just job advertising. I've always been a massive reader. Stephen King has got a book called On Writing, which is like his memoir on writing. And one of the things he says about being a good writer is you need to read a lot and you need to write a lot. You need to practice both sides of that. And I always have this bookshelf behind me because it shows kind of how many books we have in the house, but there's 4 others or so around the house that are just as full. So I spend a lot of time reading, a lot of time writing, a lot of time listening about the craft of writing as well. So when I'm talking about job advertising, I sort of come at it from both angles of things.
Well, I have one final question to ask, and this has been really great. And I think for businesses that are in high growth mode and the SME and they're doing well, but they don't have a TA team or they're just starting, I think definitely you're someone to call on to get support from. My question is this: yes, we have leaders from industry and education and government that will be listening into today, but also I think a lot of people that are in early career or mid-career thinking, okay, I need to secure work, I need to acquire skills, or I need to ensure that I'm future-proofing my career. What advice would you give them when it comes to skills acquisition and just keeping yourself as relevant as possible?
I think it's hard because it's hard to choose an industry because you don't know what's going to change in technology and things in the future. I think you look at ChatGPT and it's had a huge impact on many careers that involve some sort of writing. But I think in terms of skills acquisition, I think it's just really important to stay as abreast of things as you can in terms of like current affairs, in terms of market shifts. For me, the best way to do that is to build a really good network of people around you and go out and approach people. It always surprises me how open people are to conversation when there's no sales in there. It's just, look, I just think you're good at this. Can you help me with this particular thing? And when I look at the people that I work with now and a lot of people I spend a lot of time with now, a lot of them have come from either me or them reaching out and just saying, hey, can you give us a hand with something?
Yeah.
And suddenly you're working together 3 or 4 years down the line because you've maintained this dialogue, you've had this communication, you've learned from each other, they help you keep abreast of what's going on. I think networking is a scary word, and I think if you grow up in a situation where you don't have daddy's business and always contacts to sort of lean into, which sounds like a really stereotypical thing, but if you don't have that network, that pre-existing network to build on, it's really easy to reach out to people and just ask questions, and you'd be surprised how receptive people are to answering them.
Couldn't agree with you more, and I think that's a lovely place to end, just the encouraging people to reach out, connect. And I think in times where it does feel harder, and having been through the 2008 recession and how tough it got for candidates, and I was in recruitment at the time, I do think it's just continuing to upskill, being proactive, making connections, and that will make a difference to when things start picking up, or even getting experience where maybe it's unpaid for a short period of time, just to acquire those extra skills. It makes all the difference.
Great.
Thank you so much, Jayke, for being here today. This was wonderful. And any of the references that we've talked about in the podcast today, we'll make sure to include in the link below.
Lovely. Thanks very much.
Whether you're leading a business, shaping education, planning your next career move, or just starting out, you're part of a global conversation about how we learn, work, and grow. If you've enjoyed this episode, remember to subscribe so you never miss what's next. And for early access to new episodes, first invites to events, and a chance to connect with others driving real change, join the community at globalskillspodcast.com, because the future of skills belongs to all of us.